I raised my glass, smiling at the sea of familiar faces. Laughter echoed through the chandelier-lit room, every detail of the night curated for perfection. But just as the wine touched my lips, Ava leaned in, her breath trembling against my ear. "Don't touch the wine." Her voice was barely a whisper, but it sliced through me. Her face, drained of color, eyes wide with something between fear and guilt, made my spine stiffen. I smiled, nodded, and set the glass down. The room kept celebrating. I didn't. That single sentence, 5 words, cracked the perfect facade, and I knew something was deeply, terribly wrong. They said the party was perfect. My husband Kyle had hired a private chef. The dining room glowed under candlelight, and every guest wore the kind of smile that only came from expensive wine and careful curation. I walked from table to table in my soft ivory dress, accepting compliments, dodging questions about when we'd have children, and smiling like a porcelain doll. "You're glowing tonight, Emma," said Margaret from the bank, her diamond necklace throwing off little shards of light. "Kyle is so lucky." I agreed with a practiced nod. My hand wrapped around the stem of my wine glass again. I lifted it, ready to offer a short toast. I didn't get the chance. Ava appeared beside me so quietly that it startled me. Her mouth was close, her breath sharp against my neck. "Don't touch the wine," she said. 5 words, that's all. But her tone wasn't warning, it was desperation. Her skin was pale, her voice strained, and her eyes flicked to Kyle and back like she was weighing something she didn't want to carry. Then, just as quickly, she stepped back, offered a mechanical smile to the room, and vanished into the kitchen. I stood, frozen, the wine still hovering in my hand. Everyone around me laughed and clinked glasses. I lowered mine gently, pretending to cough, and placed it on the marble countertop behind me. No one noticed, or at least no one said anything. But my chest tightened, and the celebration around me turned into a dull roar. I drifted back into hostess mode, thanking guests, laughing at punchlines I didn't hear. But my mind was moving at a different speed. I looked for Kyle. He was across the room, surrounded by 3 men from his investment firm, talking animatedly. He had a whiskey in his hand, but he never took a sip. He only swirled it, gestured with it, then set it down. He'd toasted with wine earlier, I was sure of it, but I hadn't seen him drink it. As the night dwindled and guests left in waves, I excused myself to freshen up. Upstairs, in the quiet of our master bedroom, I reached into the back of my closet where an old laptop lay hidden behind a box of charity clothes. It was my backup, my ghost laptop. I powered it on and plugged in the flash drive I'd taken from the security hub downstairs earlier that week. I'd been curious, not suspicious, until now. I scrubbed through the footage. The kitchen camera had a clear angle of the countertop where the wine bottles had been opened and poured. At 6:47 p.m., I saw Kyle walk in. He looked over his shoulder before reaching into his coat pocket. He pulled out a dark glass vial. He unscrewed the cap and carefully tilted it over one of the wine bottles. My favorite one, the one I always reserved for special occasions. I paused the video. My stomach turned. It was subtle, controlled, like he'd done it before. I fast-forwarded. Guests arrived. Ava came into view at 7:12, helping arrange charcuterie boards. She picked up the same bottle Kyle had tampered with. She paused. She looked at the label. Her eyes widened. She put it down. That was the exact moment I knew she knew. She'd seen something, smelled something, or maybe she just knew Kyle too well. Later that night, as Kyle slept beside me, snoring softly, his arm draped over the blanket, I lay awake, eyes on the ceiling fan. My body didn't feel poisoned. No headaches, no nausea. I was still here. But that didn't calm me, because the poison wasn't the point. The point was that he had planned it. I opened my phone and searched Ava's name. Her social media was clean, curated, surface level, but there was a tagged post from 2 years ago, A photograph of her and another woman, both smiling by the garden, holding glasses of wine. The caption read, "Her laugh could make you believe in love again." I clicked the tag. Her name was Julie Brooks. I scrolled further. Julie Brooks died 18 months ago. The obituary was vague. A tragic accident at the Bradford estate. No other details, no news articles, no public investigations. Nothing. Just a quiet death buried under a polite society. I stared at the screen, the wine bottle still fresh in my mind. Kyle shifted beside me. I closed the browser, turned off the phone, and slid deeper under the covers. Tomorrow, I'd smile again. Tomorrow, I'd act like the perfect wife. But tonight, the illusion had shattered. The morning after the party, I pretended to break. I didn't leave bed until noon. When Kyle brought me tea, I flinched at his touch, whispered that I felt dizzy, nauseated, off. I told him I hadn't slept. He responded with a softness that felt rehearsed, sitting on the edge of the bed, rubbing my back. "You've been under a lot of stress lately," he said. "Maybe you should talk to someone." That was the opening he needed, and the one I let him have. By that evening, I had an appointment scheduled with Dr. Mara Levin, a psychologist Kyle insisted was discreet and experienced in high-functioning anxiety cases. I smiled, nodded, and thanked him like a good wife should. Then I looked her up. She wasn't just his suggestion. She was his classmate from Yale, a minor in behavioral science, major in manipulation. At our first session, I played the part perfectly, hands trembling, eyes red, voice shaking as I described irrational fears and feeling watched. She offered small nods, quick reassurances, and by the end of the hour, I walked out with a prescription for mild sedatives. Kyle beamed when I showed him the bottle. "You'll feel better soon," he said. At night, I took the pills, or rather, I let them dissolve under my tongue, then spit them into tissues while he showered. I followed the diet his mother sent over, even complimented her pot roast in the family group chat. I gave up my personal laptop, told Kyle it was just too much screen time. He offered to set me up with a shared tablet for grocery lists and reminders. I nodded. It was all going according to his plan. But what he didn't know was that the old hard drive hidden inside a broken air purifier in the guest room was still syncing silently to a private encrypted server I'd created during my years in defense contracting. I had built systems to trace money laundering through crypto tunnels. This was child's play. Late one night, while Kyle snored softly beside me, I received a notification on my burner phone, a secure message from Ava. No text, just a video. I watched it under the covers, the screen brightness barely visible. Kyle stood in the corner of our garage, talking in hushed tones to his mother. "She's not going to just hand it over," he said. "She thinks she's in control." His mother's voice was colder than I expected. "Then make her disappear, before the contract expires. If she files, we lose everything." I paused the video, my chest constricted. Contract? I thought we were past prenups and protective clauses, but apparently there were timelines, conditions, and I was on the wrong side of both. The next day, I transformed. No more tension. I smiled more, laughed at Kyle's jokes, asked for advice on trivial things. I told him I'd started journaling to process my emotions. His eyes lit up. "That's great, Em. You're really working on yourself." I made sure to leave the notebook out, half covered on the nightstand, just barely visible. It was handwritten, sloppy enough to look vulnerable. Inside, every single page was a trap. I wrote that I suspected Ava of jealousy, that I'd mixed my own sleeping meds wrong, that I was afraid I might hurt myself. All lies, but the kind of lies that would test his intentions. 3 days later, I noticed the notebook had been moved, just slightly. A different angle on the ribbon. A page I hadn't turned left open. I smiled to myself and added a new entry, one that hinted I'd rewritten our will to favor Kyle. That night, he brought me flowers. 2 more days passed, and the journal disappeared. I didn't panic. That was the goal. I waited. 48 hours later, I received an anonymous email. It was a scan of one of the pages, the last one. It read, "If I die suddenly, this notebook explains everything." I recognized the watermark of a tabloid site embedded into the bottom corner. It hadn't been published, not yet, but it had been leaked to someone. Probably a reporter, or a lawyer, or a handler. I didn't know who, and that was the point. Someone besides me now held a piece of the truth, or what looked like truth, and if anything happened to me, the notebook would surface. That was my insurance policy. Kyle looked nervous at dinner that night. He picked at his food, kept checking his phone. I asked him if everything was okay. He smiled, thin and tight. "Just work stuff." I returned the smile. "Don't let it eat you alive." Kyle apologized on a Wednesday morning, his voice full of gravel and guilt. He'd been distant, he admitted. Work had consumed him. "You deserve a reset," he said, brushing a loose strand of hair behind my ear. "Let me take you away, just the two of us." He already had a cabin booked, he added, a secluded lodge in the mountains. No cell service, no Wi-Fi, just us and the trees. I nodded, smiled like I'd been waiting for this. Inside, something colder than suspicion stirred. I packed light. He insisted I leave electronics behind. "No distractions," he whispered, kissing my forehead. "Let's be real again." The drive up was scenic, curving roads flanked by endless pines. Kyle played soft jazz. I stared out the window, counting the seconds between his glances in the rearview mirror. At the cabin, everything looked quaint. Stone fireplace, rustic beams, mismatched furniture curated to look accidental. Kyle made hot chocolate while I unpacked. He handed me a mug and watched me drink it. Or at least, watch me pretend. That night, I couldn't sleep. It wasn't the silence. It was the feeling of being observed, like the woods were breathing. I stood at the window for nearly an hour, watching shadows stretch and recoil. I saw no animals, but there was something. A flicker between the trees, too tall to be a deer, too smooth to be wind. I reached for the backup camera I'd hidden in my coat lining, pressed record, and mounted it facing the clearing. A flash went off in the distance, then another. Blinks of light, short, deliberate, Morse code. I narrowed my eyes. It spelled WATCHWATER, then again DONTDRINK, Ava. At dinner the next night, Kyle poured wine into 2 identical glasses. He held mine longer, swirling it as he spoke about a colleague who faked a breakdown to get a promotion. He laughed. I did too. When he stepped away to stoke the fire, I swapped the glasses. He didn't notice. Or if he did, he pretended not to. An hour later, he looked pale. 2 hours in, he stumbled, slurred. He said he was tired. I helped him into bed, tucked him in gently, then lay beside him, wide awake, listening to every shift in his breath. By morning, he was vomiting. By noon, he couldn't stand. I drove him to the nearest hospital, a small facility an hour down the mountain. Doctors ran tests, asked questions. I answered most of them. Kyle was too weak to argue. When they returned with results, the nurse's eyes were cautious. "There's a trace of neuroinhibitors in his system," she said. "It mimics a mild stroke. We need to keep him overnight." Kyle looked at me then, not as a husband, but as a man trying to decode a threat. "She made dinner," he rasped. "She brought the wine." The doctors exchanged glances. The police arrived 20 minutes later. I was calm when they questioned me, said I loved my husband, said I was devastated. I told them about our trip, about the meals, the mugs of cocoa, the wine. I didn't say anything about the glass switch, but I did hand over a neatly folded note, one I had written 2 days earlier, time-stamped and emailed to my encrypted account. It read, "If something happens to Kyle, it won't be my doing. I suspect he's trying to stage an incident to frame me. I believe he's under pressure regarding a financial deadline." It was enough to stall the arrest, enough to plan a counter-narrative. They let me go after 2 hours, pending toxicology. Kyle stayed overnight under observation, surrounded by machines that beeped too slowly. I returned to the cabin and retrieved the hidden camera. The night footage showed a man in a coat circling the cabin, stopping occasionally to point something at the walls, some sort of signal jammer maybe. Not Ava, not a hunter. He moved like a man on assignment. I forwarded the footage to myself, encrypted it, then smashed the device and flushed the pieces. Later that week, while reviewing files on a private server, I found something new, a digital invoice, payment from Kyle's firm to a consultant under a pseudonym. Curious, I followed the trail through 3 shell corporations. The name at the end made my stomach turn. Dr. Mara Levin. She wasn't just Kyle's friend. She wasn't just a therapist. She was on payroll, his payroll, which meant every session, every pill, every note she had written about me was a performance, not therapy, strategy. And I had just stepped into the real game. I disappeared. No announcements, no dramatic exits. One morning, I simply deleted all my social media accounts, forwarded my mail to a P.O. box in another state, and left our suburban house without a trace. Kyle was still in the hospital, but conscious enough to notice the silence. I imagined him waking up to an empty room, no texts from me, no new appointments with Dr. Levin, just the void he'd crafted himself into. I checked into a small inn, 2 counties over, paid in cash, no digital footprints. I used the name Ellie Rhodes, the same alias I'd once used during a federal assignment in Prague. I wasn't just hiding, I was preparing. 3 days in, Ava met me in the back corner of an old diner. Her hands were shaking as she slid a black drive across the table. Every transfer, every asset shift, every offshore account from the last 3 years, she whispered. I made backups. I thought I might need it one day. She had no idea how right she was. Back at the inn, I plugged the drive into my burner laptop and watched the truth unfold like a spreadsheet of betrayal. Kyle had been draining our joint investments, laundering through dummy corporations, routing funds through Eastern Europe. His digital fingerprints were everywhere, too confident to use proxies, too arrogant to assume anyone would ever look. I worked through the night, building the file. Financial timelines, suspicious withdrawals, anomalous transactions. I mapped it all, each movement tied to a date, each date to a lie. By morning, the dossier was ready. I encrypted everything into a single drive, printed 2 hard copies, and submitted them, one to the IRS, one to the FBI, through protected legal channels. I didn't sign my name. I didn't need to. The data would speak for itself. 2 weeks later, Kyle was arrested outside a steakhouse during a meeting with one of his shell companies. The headlines were quick and cruel. Wealth manager linked to multi-state fraud scheme. I watched the footage on a motel television, his wrists in cuffs, his jaw clenched, reporters shouting his name. He didn't resist, just walked, eyes forward. But what chilled me wasn't the arrest. It was the way he looked directly into the nearest camera and smiled. Later that day, I visited him at the detention center. I didn't tell anyone. The guards led me to a windowed booth. Kyle sat on the other side wearing orange. He looked tired but calm. I thought you'd be gloating, he said. I stared at him. You knew I'd come. Of course, he replied. You like to look people in the eye before you win. There was a beat of silence. You should know, he added, leaning forward. I didn't do this alone. I didn't ask who. I just stood, nodded once, and left. I already knew the storm wasn't over. The next phase required a different weapon, voice. I reached out to Clara Ortega, a journalist known for her exposés on domestic abuse and institutional silence. She had been through it herself, beaten by a husband who was shielded by police connections. She listened without interrupting as I told her my story, every twist, every silence, every fake smile. And when I finished, she said, "Let's burn it down." The interview aired a week later, raw, uncut, powerful. I spoke about the quiet erasure of women through medication, about the convenience of mental health labels, about how society politely applauded wives who suffered silently. I didn't name Kyle. I didn't have to. The patterns were universal. The video went viral in hours. Women across the country commented with their own stories. Therapists spoke out. Attorneys reached out. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving. I was shifting something bigger than myself. But victories come with echoes. That night, as I packed to leave the inn, a new email slipped through my encrypted server. No subject line, no sender, just a single sentence. "You've turned over his mask. Now it's time to meet mine." I clicked the attachment. It was a video. My mother-in-law stood in her kitchen, smiling at the camera. Calm, elegant, her voice smooth as ever. "You've made quite the mess, darling," she said. "But don't worry, I'm going to clean it up." She reached off screen, then returned holding something I couldn't see clearly. "And Emma?" she added. Her smile sharpened. "It's my turn now." Victory, it turned out, was a fragile thing. In the weeks following Kyle's arrest and the viral interview, I regained everything he tried to strip from me. The accounts froze, then unfroze in my favor. The house returned to my name. My reputation, once a whisper among social circles, became a firestorm of empowerment. Strangers called me brave. Reporters emailed with offers. Activist groups asked me to speak, and yet I slept with the lights on. It wasn't just paranoia, it was a pattern. The lawyer who helped me file the anonymous report against Kyle was suddenly disbarred. No official reason, just procedural concerns. My accountant was audited aggressively, his family's passports flagged. Even Clara, the journalist, found herself locked out of her publishing platform for nearly a week due to suspicious activity. All of them, one by one, being unstitched. Ava was the last to fall. She called from a payphone near the Colorado border. Her voice shook as she spoke in clipped syllables. "They know," she said. "About me. About the hard drive. Someone came to my apartment. Nothing was stolen, but everything was touched. My cat was gone. They left the door wide open." I begged her to come back, to let me protect her. She said she couldn't. "They're not after me," she whispered. "They're warning you." Then she hung up. I never heard from her again. I doubled my home security, changed locations every 4 nights. Every morning I checked door sensors, reinstalled encrypted servers, changed passwords twice. But one night, I came back to a motel room I'd booked under a fake name and found a small manila envelope sitting on the bed. Inside was a single photo. I was sleeping, in my own bed. My real bed, at the safe house only 2 people knew about. The angle was downward, intimate, taken from above, from the ceiling. But I hadn't installed a ceiling cam. The timestamp was from 3 nights prior. There was no note, no demand, just proof that they were closer than I thought. I didn't sleep that night, or the next. Instead, I hunted. I started with Margaret Thorne, Kyle's mother. Her social accounts were clean, curated, but her financials, once I scraped through encrypted gateways, revealed quiet donations to foundations I'd never heard of. Names that didn't show up on IRS databases. Names that did, however, pop up in deeply buried intelligence briefings I still had backdoor access to. The Wilshire Society was one of them. Publicly, it was an organization that offered scholarships to young women in law and medicine. Privately, it had no real office, no board, no public registry. But it did have patterns. Every woman they sponsored had a history of controlling high-profile family narratives, particularly involving wealthy sons. I traced a name that appeared too many times, Lillian Crew. She was a retired litigator, now an alleged mentor to women like Margaret. She was also the head trustee of a private consulting firm based in Boston, one that only worked with defense attorneys in messy divorce cases. And once, long ago, she was also a name in my father's contact list. I remembered her vaguely, a sharp voice at holiday parties, a woman who wore brooches like medals. She'd been his advisor when he worked at the Treasury. She'd disappeared after he died in a car accident. I was 16. I ran her name through my system. Nothing flagged, no crimes, no scandals, but a handwritten note from my father's old journal, which I'd scanned years ago and kept archived, surfaced. It said, If anything ever happens, check Lillian. She's the last chess move. My blood ran cold. She wasn't just involved, she was orchestrating. The wives who fought back, the women who threatened empire. They were handled, quieted, rewritten. And the husbands? They stayed clean. Because Lillian's real skill wasn't law or money, it was optics. That night, I made a new file. Not a dossier, not a report, a war plan. Because this wasn't about Kyle anymore. It was about the system that built him, and I was done playing defense. The first time I stepped into a Wilshire Society luncheon, no one recognized me. I wore a soft gray dress, heels modest enough to signal class but not ambition. My name tag read Emily Rhodes, a variation too polite to question. The ballroom smelled of polished silver and old wealth. Around me, women air-kissed, laughed through clenched jaws, and traded charity updates like stock tips. Every smile had sharp corners. I was invited as a donor advisor through a faux foundation I built in under 48 hours, funded through a legitimate grant I'd secured from the same network they all used. The digital trail was perfect, untouchable, just like theirs. My first target was Eleanor Voss, an ex-judge, current board member, and Margaret Thorne's closest confidant. She spoke of policy with the kind of voice that made men defer and women flinch. Over canapes, she told me about a new initiative, a mentorship program for young brides of powerful men. "We teach them how to stay," she said with a wink, "even when it gets difficult." I laughed, sipped champagne, and said exactly what she expected. What a necessary cause. Over 3 weeks, I embedded myself in their world. Dinners, strategy calls, private estate tours. I listened more than I spoke, and when I did speak, I made sure it was in the language they understood. Discretion, tradition, self-preservation. Behind the scenes, I planted cameras, devices disguised as brooches and perfume bottles. I recorded every offhand remark, every cold calculation about which women needed guidance and which needed containment. One afternoon, I sat across from Lillian Crew herself as she detailed the media response strategy if another Emma Carlisle situation happened again. They never suspected I was that Emma, not until the night I invited them to an exclusive retreat in Sonoma. The wine estate I rented had a panoramic view of the valley and an acoustic system that could transmit audio to satellites. I told them it was a private celebration, no press, no staff, just us. All 22 of them arrived in chauffeured silence. What they didn't know was that every wall, mirror, and table centerpiece in that room was wired. What they didn't know was that I had partnered with Clara Ortega again, and this time she'd brought 3 independent media outlets, live streaming everything to a global audience through an encrypted channel. The women drank, laughed, whispered stories they thought were safe, and then I stood. "I want to thank you," I began, "for showing me exactly how much power sits quietly in rooms like these." They clapped. "I used to think I was alone," I continued. "Just a wife, just a casualty." They watched, smiles faltering. "But the truth doesn't need to scream," I said, pulling a small remote from my pocket. "It just needs to be right." The projector hummed. Screens descended from the ceiling, one by one, displaying real-time footage from every secret conversation they thought they'd buried. Audio overlays exposed plans to discredit whistleblowers, financial trails from pharmaceuticals to media outlets, private therapy notes shared with investors. They stood. Some yelled, others begged. But the stream had already reached over 3 million viewers. By midnight, senators were tweeting statements. By morning, half the Wilshire Society had been subpoenaed. A former First Lady denounced the organization publicly. Lillian Crew resigned from 4 corporate boards in 12 hours. Margaret Thorne vanished from public view. I didn't celebrate. I didn't sleep for 2 days. Instead, I launched a program. It was called Glasslight, a training initiative for women to identify manipulation, secure financial autonomy, and reclaim psychological agency. Not flashy, not dramatic, just quiet, focused resistance. Each cohort was given legal counsel, encrypted storage access, and trauma specialists. We didn't just heal, we taught women how to burn the systems that tried to erase them. The first 3 cities sold out in under a week. The 4th had to move to a stadium. On opening day in New York, as I stood backstage watching hundreds of women take their seats, Ava appeared beside me. Her hair was longer now, her eyes sharper. "I miss this," she said softly. "Missed what?" "The look in your eyes when you're about to blow something up." I smiled. "You ready to go back in?" I asked. She nodded. "I'll be their new favorite donor." I knew she'd be perfect. No one could navigate rich mothers better than a woman who had survived one. We shook hands like partners. The keynote went viral within an hour. But what I remember most came 3 days later. A woman, mid-40s, tailored coat, hands that trembled, waited for me outside the event. She didn't give her name, just looked at me with wide eyes. "I saw your interview," she said. "Your story. Everything." I nodded, used to this by now, but then her voice cracked. "My husband tried to poison me last year," she whispered, "and I thought I was crazy." "You're not," I said gently. She reached into her coat and pulled out a journal, just like the one I'd planted for Kyle. "They told me I was unstable," she continued, "and now I think I know who's behind it. But Emma, they're not done. Not yet." I took the journal and held her hand. "Then we won't be either."